I'm here to talk to you about the report that I've written recently called Disruptive Diversity. And you've probably got David Bonfield with you, so you might get some background from him. But basically, he asked me back in June of this year to have a look at ICE from an external perspective and see how I thought we could make some faster progress towards increasing diversity. I think and I know that ICE are doing a lot of work in this area already, so it's not to criticise anything that's going on now, and I think what's being done is really good. It's just to try and make some faster progress really and see if there's anything that we can do that gives more of a disruptive change. So we're looking for a bigger step change. So you've probably had a look at the report or you've got it with you. What I'm going to do is just basically say what's in the report, give you a few examples of what's in here, and give you an overall perspective of what I think will make a bigger difference. Now, the report you've got is split into two different sections. It's the first part of it, and the bulk of it really, is what the institution can do itself. So what it can do with its own procedures, practices, projects, and through its members as well, what it can do itself with its own work. And the second part of it is what the institution can do through its influence on other organisations, so the government, for example, or industry, the wider industry, or education. So I will talk a little bit about both of those things, but just remember that these are only ideas. These are just my ideas, and they generally contain practical actions. But what I think will make the biggest difference to the institution is to try and have a mindset change, if you like, rather than actions are really good and that's great, but the danger with actions is that they're often other people's actions. And what I think will make the biggest change is if everybody takes on a different view of diversity and inclusion and becomes more inclusive themselves. So diversity is quite a difficult thing to engage with because you can't be any more diverse than you are. You are who you are. You can do things to increase diversity, but what you can do, which is positive, is be more inclusive. So inclusivity is like a lens that you put over every single thing that you do as an institution. So every project and every part of your work that the ICE does has to be looked at through the lens of inclusivity. Just like health and safety and just like ethics, this is a kind of top level view of everything. And I think one of the biggest changes will come when that's embedded in all aspects of the work of the institution. I think what might help also is if you get an idea of who you want to be included in what you do. So if you get a good picture of who the different groups are that you want to make sure that they feel included, then that might help. Now, I'll give you two examples of how inclusivity manifests itself, and these are examples of mine from just the last week. So last week I went around the Duxford Air Museum with a guide, and I'm an aerospace engineer. I worked for Citroën on car engines, and I'm quite interested in engines and aerospace. And when we got to the Merlin engine, the guide said to the whole group of us, he said, well, I don't want to appear sexist here, but this might appeal to the gentlemen. And he literally turned his back on me and started speaking about the engine to the men that were there. Now that really didn't make me feel included, and that was an example of where there was no inclusivity. And when I looked around the museum, I noticed that there were no women in there at all. There was nothing that I could look at that made me as a woman in that environment feel included. Another example was I was at the skills show last week as well, and in the engineering section of the skills show they had really good hands-on activities all over the place, but had they thought of those activities with an inclusive lens, they would have done things differently, I think. Because I think in general for girls, what girls like to do, and this is a generalisation, but what girls like to see is context. Boys as well, it's not only girls, but they like to see context to things. So where we had, for example, we went to the Welding Institute stand, they were doing some non-destructive testing of a weld. And that was all very well. We had a go, it was a hands-on activity, and they explained why we were doing it, and then the students just walked off again. But what was missing was any type of context. So there was nothing to say that, well, you know why we're doing this, because if a weld breaks, then a bridge falls down, for example, or a boat cracks. And so there was none of that context. And I think if you'd been doing that activity with the lens of inclusivity, you would think, okay, so what do different groups of people want to get out of this activity, and how can we change it? Even if it's a really small change, but how can we change it to be more inclusive? And that can make so much difference. Anyway, so inclusivity is the key, I think, and that is something that everybody can do. Now, the way you do that is kind of up to you, and you can do that through, it's a bit of a thought process, and once you have that thought process in mind, it becomes natural. But to start with, it might be done through a tick box exercise. You might want to just double check against everything that you're doing it inclusively, or you might have a procedure to do that, or you might have training, but I think that's the ultimate goal. So back to the report, and in the report are practical ways of increasing diversity. And some of the ways that I'll bring out 2 or 3 of these, and then I'll bring out 2 or 3 of the other group, which are the kind of wider influencers. What I think ICE can do itself. So benchmarking is one of them. Statistics, data, benchmarking. I think it's really important to be clear how different groups of your members access the services that you provide, for example. And that's not just having a snapshot of what the diversity of your membership looks like, but that's looking at every different service, for example, and saying, so how do women or different underrepresented groups access evening lectures? Do they find it as easy to access them as other groups of members? Do as many women, for example, come to your conferences? Are they included in the services that you provide? Where do women drop off the register? One of the things that strikes me from the Engineering Council statistics is that they say 57% of women drop off the professional register under the age of 45 compared to 17% of men. Now, clearly there's a massive problem there. Women are dropping out at a certain age, and we're not providing services that retain them. So what can we do to make sure that all of our members, and our current members, but also the ones that we want to attract, are included in everything? So benchmarking and statistics is really key. Keep track of those, look for ways of improving and mitigating trends that are looking as if they're going in the wrong direction. So benchmarking is one thing. Professional reviews and accreditation. Now, I know already ICE is one of the most well-respected institutions in terms of its accreditation process, but can more be done? Are there more things that can be done to make sure that the next generation of students are coming through knowing the value of inclusivity and diversity? For example, when you accredit universities, could you ensure that every university which has an accredited degree has the Athena Swan Bronze Award, for example? Now, Athena Swan is the system that universities have in place for encouraging gender diversity. Now, the Medical Research Council mandates that all money given to universities for Medical Research Council grants is given to universities which have Athena Swan Bronze. EPS Aussie, on the other hand, don't do that. But, ICE could, with its accreditation process, also promote Athena Swan. And also the value of diverse teams and inclusivity to the engineering solution and to productivity and to profit and to that diverse thought is something that we need to ensure that we're passing on to the next generation. And do we understand that well enough? Have we quantified the value of diverse teams to a business, to an engineering solution? Now, that's something I think do with more work, and then passing that on to the next generation is really key, and it can be done through accreditation, for example. Also, professional review. Are the next generation of chartered engineers aware of why we want inclusivity, why we want diversity? So that's something that maybe can be looked at. Outreach activities, how we engage with the next generation. I know that we do some really, really good outreach activities, but can we go further? Is there more that we can do to add more context to the outreach activities that we're providing? And I would say that we need to do something specifically to attract girls. Now that's not instead of what we do, that's in addition to what we currently do. So I think we've got such a history of male dominance in civil engineering that we've got to do so much more than be gender neutral. We've got to actually go out there and say, look, we are talking to you, to the girls out there. It's not enough to just have an activity that we see as being gender neutral, because that won't appeal to girls. They won't realise that actually you are talking to them. You need to do more than that, and I'd say you shouldn't be frightened of doing that, because it's like any marketing of any product. You need to know who your audience are, and you need to know what you're delivering to them. Anyway, so they're just 3 examples of what can be done within ICE, and there are plenty more in this report, but the key is that you have a look, choose what you think is relevant and deliverable, and hopefully go ahead with those. And then more broadly, in terms of how ICE can influence other people. So government policy, for example, I know there's a big push this year on infrastructure, and infrastructure contracts the procurement contracts could be set up to encourage diversity and inclusivity more. For example, it could say in the procurement contracts that the governments give out that equal pay needs to be reported. We could say, for example, that we want to work towards gender ratioed shortlists. So shortlists for jobs have an equal 50-50 male-female ratio. So these are some of the things that government procurement contracts could contain, and we can influence that from the ICE. Industrial influence, we could influence the industrial partners to sign up to the WISE 10 steps, for example, or the government's Think Act Report framework. Now we might need to give them help with that, so we might need training to go alongside that to say how they implement these frameworks within their organisations, but that's a really valid thing to be able to do. And education as well. I think careers education in engineering is something that we could really lead on. I think Tomorrow's Engineers is a good programme for the younger students, but I think there's a real gap in terms of engineering careers education for the 16, 17 and 18-year-olds. And I think ICE could really lead a consortium to provide something that's not segregated by these artificial barriers between different, like ICE and IMechE and IET, something that's across the board, really good careers information. And I think that's really missing at the moment, and something that ICE could probably lead on that would generate much better diversity in the sector. Anyway, so they're just practical ways that we can increase diversity. But as I said before, I think the bigger changes will come when we start to realise that inclusivity in everything we do is the way to go forward. I mean, these programmes are all great, and practical actions are very good as well. But yeah, I think inclusivity is the key. That's basically all I want to say. Thank you.